watching. Now I'm so excited to be back with a new video tutorial, and especially excited as this week's video is sponsored by the cake decorating company. Now, to celebrate the launch of the Cake Decorating Company's Black Friday sale, they have sent me a whole host of cake decorating tools that are available on their website to use in today's tutorial. So I'm going to be using all these products to show you how I made this two-tier pink rose cake. Now, the Cake Decorating Company's Black Friday sale starts very soon. It's starting at midnight on Friday the 24th and is lasting for an entire 24 hours, so the whole of Friday. They're going to be running 20% off almost all the products on their website, and I will put all the details in the description below along with a link so you can check out their Black Friday sale. Okay, let's get started. So I've baked a 5-inch sponge cake. Now I always like to have 2 inches between each of my tiers, but because I am going to be adding roses around the outside of the bottom tier, I actually baked a 7-inch cake, but I've cut it down to about 6.5 just to allow me a bit of space for those roses around the edge so that the cake still looks in proportion. So the first thing that I'm going to do is fill and prepare my cakes using some American buttercream. Now, one of the products that the Cake Decorating Company sent me were these Ingenious edibles concentrated flavour icing sugars, and I'm actually using these to flavour my buttercream. So they sent me a lemon drizzle, a strawberry milkshake, a salted caramel and a vanilla. For this buttercream, I'm actually using the strawberry milkshake. So when making my buttercream, I've just sifted that in with the rest of my ingredients. It smells absolutely amazing. So I'm just using this icing sugar instead of adding the liquid flavouring into my buttercream. Because I'm not adding in that liquid flavouring, I'm going to add a little more of the milk just so it's at the correct consistency. Now I will put a link to my American buttercream recipe in the description below so you can find it there. Now to colour my buttercream, I just used some of the Colour Flex by Sugar Flare in Candy Pink. Now, as well as using this colour to colour my buttercream, I'm also going to be using it to colour some of my fondant. One thing about the Colour Flex is these are actually oil-based food gel colours instead of water-based, which means that you can use them to also colour chocolate or candy melts. So I'm going to fill each layer of my cake with some American buttercream. I'm then going to start by adding a crumb coat around the outside. Now all a crumb coat is just a thin layer of buttercream around the outside of the cake, just locking in any loose crumbs so that when we add our final layer around the outside, it's nice and perfect. Now, as I add this buttercream between my layers, you can just smell that strawberry milkshake. The flavouring isn't too intense. It's quite a subtle flavouring, but it is so delicious. I'm then going around just smoothing out that crumb coat before taking off the excess from that top edge. Once I've added my crumb coat, I'm then going to pop my cake into the fridge just for that buttercream to firm up. And I'm going to do exactly the same with my bottom tier. For my top tier, I'm going to be covering this in some fondant, and for this I'm going to be using the sugar paste. Now I'm using the white one as I'm going to be showing you how to colour it yourself, but if you didn't want to colour it, they do also sell some pre-coloured ones in such a variety of colours. Now when you get the sugar paste, it's actually quite a firm fondant, but this is because it does have so much elasticity, and this means that it's great for getting sharp edges. You also don't get elephant skin, and it doesn't rip as easy. Now, as you can see, out of the packet is quite a firm fondant, so I'm going to cut smaller bits and just knead these to soften them. I can then join them all together in a larger lump. Now, if you do find that you can't soften the fondant, one thing you can do is pop it in the microwave on defrost for just a few seconds, and this will just soften it slightly enough that you'll be able to work it in your hands. Now to colour the sugar paste, you can use water-based or oil-based colours. I'm going to use the Colour Flex by Sugar Flare, which I used on the buttercream. Now I'm really loving the Candy Pink. So what I like to do is just create a little dip in the top and just add in some of my gel colour. I can then fold that over and start to knead it through, just pushing it away with the palm of my hand, and you'll start to see that colour coming through. So I'm just going to continue until I get a nice solid block of colour. Also, gel colours are super pigmented, so you might just need a really small amount to create a really pretty pastel shade. And then you can build that colour up if you do want it slightly darker. Now, if at any time you find that your sugar paste is getting sticky, I just like to pop down a small amount of corn flour, and that will just help release it from your work surface. Now, if you've got any of the sugar paste that you haven't used, I like to wrap this in cling film and just pop it into an airtight bag or airtight container. And this is going to stop it drying out. And once that colour has all mixed through, there we have the sugar paste coloured in this pretty pink colour, ready to use on our cake. Once my crumb coat has firmed up, I'm going to start working on my top tier. Now, you could add another layer of buttercream around the outside and use this as a base, but I always love to use ganache if I am covering my cakes in fondant. Now, because this is going to be a two-tiered cake, before I go any further, one thing that is so important to think about is the structure that we're going to create inside our cake to hold our cake up. So I'm going to place my 5-inch cake on a cake board. This one is quite a sturdy board, so I'm going to pop down a small amount of my ganache, transferring my cake over before covering the whole of the outside in my ganache. I can then pop my dowels to one side until I'm ready to stack my cake. So I'm going to go in and just add this on top of that crumb coat. Now, I will also leave a link to the ganache recipe that I used in the description below. And the reason that I love to use ganache under sugar paste or fondant is because it sets quite firm. So you're able to go in and really push down to get some nice sharp edges. Once I'm happy with how that ganache is looking, I'm going to pop my cake in the fridge just for it to firm up so that I'm able to cover it in fondant. Okay, so we've got our coloured sugar paste and our ganache has set firm on our cake. So I'm going to cover my cake with the sugar paste. Now, you can roll this out and just drape it over the top, but I'm actually going to show you the paneling method. This is a great method if you struggle to get nice sharp edges on the top of your cakes. So I'm just starting off with some boiled water, and I'm just running this over my ganache just to allow that sugar paste to stick. I'm then going to start by taking a small ball and rolling this out until it's large enough to cover the top of my cake. And I want this to be around 3 to 4 millimeters in thickness. Now, before I add it onto my cake, I always like to take a paddle smoother and just run over the top. I can then bring back in my cake and I'm just going to place that over the top. Again, going in with my paddle smoother. You then want to take a sharp knife or a craft knife, and I'm going to push this in until I meet the edge of my cake. And then run it around, just cutting off any excess. I'm then going to roll out enough for the sides. So I want to roll out a strip of the sugar paste until it's long enough to wrap around the entire cake. And I just like to use a piece of ribbon which I can wrap around my cake, and I can use this as a guide as I roll. If at any time you're finding that you're rolling over your sugar paste but it's not getting any longer, you just want to lift it up and release it from your work surface and pop down a little bit more corn flour. And you want to make sure that the height of your panel is just slightly taller than your cake. You can then use a craft knife, or I always like to use a pizza cutter. And I'm just going to chop off the excess and also run a straight line along the bottom. Now, you want to make sure that the sugar paste isn't sticky, as we are going to be rolling it on itself. So if it is, you can just pop a little bit of corn flour and just really loosely start to wind that up, just keeping the bottom edge nice and straight. Unwind that sugar paste, just pushing it against the side of the cake as I go. Where the two pieces meet, I'm just going to fold that back so it covers that join. I can then take a sharp craft knife and just coming in, so I'm going to be cutting through both pieces of sugar paste. I'm just going to cut down, and you can do one at a time. I can then peel this piece away and take out that excess panel. And then when I push those together, I'm then going to go down and just pull that seam together with my finger, just pinching it slightly. Then taking one of my paddle smoothers, I'm just going to run around my cake and make sure that has stuck. Now, if there is any excess at the bottom that you need to trim off, you can just go in with your pizza cutter or your craft knife and just trim around the edge so that our top will stick to the side. I'm just going to use a little bit of water on a paintbrush and just run it around that top edge. I can then take my craft knife and I want to go in at a 90-degree angle and just trim off the excess. Okay, so now I have the top and the sides covered, I'm going to work on perfecting this top edge. If we find any areas are slightly too short, you can just pull that fondant up with your paddle smoother and then place one of my smoothers against my cake and the other one is going to go on top with that straight edge against the other smoother. And I'm going to work my smoothers in one motion as if they're joined, and we're trying to force that fondant into the right angle that we've created. So I've just popped it onto a non-slip mat as I only want to work on about 1 inch at a time. So I'm just going to apply pressure, pushing against the side and on the top, just going backwards and forwards. And as I do that, you can see that the two pieces of fondant are blending together and we're getting a nice sharp edge. Now you will always have a slight faint little line where the two pieces have joined, but the more you work it, the more that's going to disappear. I'm going to move the cake around by about 1 inch and just carry on. So as you can see, this is a great method for covering your cakes if you do struggle draping your fondant over the top. Now, once you're happy with how that's looking, I'm going to go in with my flexi smoothers and again, using them as if they were one, pushing that fondant into that right angle. Now, you would always have a slight join on the back where the two pieces met. So I always like to put this bit at the back. So there we have our top tier, which is covered in the sugar paste using the paneling method. Now, as I mentioned, this video is sponsored by the Cake Decorating Company, and I just wanted to let you know a little bit more about them. The Cake Decorating Company are the UK's largest retailer of cake decorating supplies. They sell thousands of products, everything you're going to need to make the most amazing cakes. Now, as well as the tools that I'm using in today's video, they stock everything from fondant, cake boxes, cake tins, cake boards, gel colours, luster dust and so much more. So do head over and check them out. Now, if you're watching this tutorial and the Black Friday sale has ended, fear not, I do have another discount code that you guys can use. You can get 10% off across full price items on the Cake Decorating Company by using my code LINS10, and I will put all the details in the description below. So let's get back to creating our cake. Now, I thought it would look really pretty to completely cover the bottom tier of this cake in roses. Now, the Cake Decorating Company have sent me these 2 rose cutters. So we have the Easiest Rose Ever by FMM, and I also have the smaller version. The normal one just has this larger rose cutter, and then the smaller one we get 2 separate rose cutters. Now, I'm using some of the sugar paste, and I haven't added anything to this. The reason that I'm using the sugar paste on its own is because I am going to be adding these onto the side of a cake. So I want them to be completely edible. If you add modelling paste or Tylo powder, it's going to firm them up slightly, so they're not going to be as easy to cut through and as easy to eat. Now, because we are using the sugar paste that has this amazing elasticity, this is going to mean that I can roll it a lot thinner than some other brands of fondant, and this will make it perfect for my roses. I'm going to roll this out as thin as I can get it. And I'm going to be making my roses in lots of different shades of pink. I'm going to take my cutter, and this one is the larger one. I'm then going to take a foam mat and a ball tool. Now, if you don't have a ball tool, you could just use the rounded end of your rolling pin and just run that around the edge, just thinning it out. Now, one thing that I love about the sugar paste, because you do have that elasticity, it really acts like modelling paste or floral paste that you can really push in with that ball tool and it's not going to tear. I'm then going to flip that over, and you can either use some edible glue or I've just got a small amount of water. Then want to paint a strip of your water down the centre and just fold that in half. I'm then going to take some more water and just run that along the bottom, and this is just going to allow our rose to stick together as we roll it up. Now, the most important thing is the way we roll the first petal, as this is going to be the inside of your flower. So we want to create a flower bud. I'm going to wind that quite tightly. And then we're going to continue winding that until I get to the third petal. Now you can continue rolling all the way along, just keeping it in line, but to make it slightly more realistic, I like to pick it up and then continue to wind that round, but just lift those outer petals slightly so that our flower bud looks like it's a little bit further down, and continue winding that round until we get to the end. Now, as you can see, our rose is quite closed up, so I'm going to use my Dresden tool and just go in, just starting to open that out, just creating a little bit of space between those petals. And then on the outer ones, I'm going to use my fingers, pull them back and just pull them into a little point. So just rolling them over and pulling them down. And there you have just a super easy, pretty little rose. Now, if I want to make my rose slightly larger and have more petals around the outside, I've got another strip. I'm placing that between two of my existing petals. I'm going to continue to wind that around. Now, I like to do this in stages, so I do the center first so that I'm able to open that out before adding on the extra petals. I can then go in exactly the same way, just pulling those out, and to make it look realistic, again, just going in, just pinching those. Now, because I'm just using the sugar paste, the larger your rose gets, the more those outer petals are just gonna flop over. So just with my larger roses, I like to dry these upside down. So I'm gonna take a cocktail stick and I can then hang it over a glass, just so that whilst it dries slightly, it's going to keep its shape. With the smaller ones, you can just place those on your work surface and just leave those to dry. You can also make small flower buds just by trimming some of those petals off at a diagonal. And one thing I have found is the thinner that you're able to roll your fondant or sugar paste, the more realistic those roses are gonna look. And as you roll that up, you're just gonna get the start of your flower. So I'm just pulling those outer ones out slightly, just to give you a small little flower bud. Now, this cutter, it makes it super quick to make roses, and if you are quite new to making roses, it means you don't have to cut out lots of individual petals. Now, you can leave your roses as they are to add onto cakes or cupcakes. I actually want to cut these down so I can use them on the side of my cake. Currently, they're quite wide and I only want them to be around 1 centimetre. So I'm going to take my craft knife and just running it around, just trim off the excess piece I don't need. If you have any of the petals that start to come away, you can just add a little bit of water to stick those back on. I'm now going to create enough roses to cover my entire bottom tier. Okay, so I've been using the 3 sizes of rose cutters, and I've actually made around 150 roses to go on the side of the cake. Now, I have left these overnight just to firm up slightly so I'm able to push them into the side of the cake without them distorting. One question I get asked quite a lot in my videos is when I create fondant decorations, if these can also be added onto buttercream cakes. So for the bottom tier of my cake, I'm actually going to cover this in buttercream and we're going to stick our roses onto the side. So I've got some more of my candy pink buttercream and I'm going in just covering my bottom tier. Now, the most important thing with this cake, because I will be stacking it, I am just going to make sure it's level. So I'm popping down a small amount of parchment paper and using a small spirit level. I'm just going to make sure it's nice and level for my cake that's going to sit on the top. There we have our bottom tier covered in buttercream. Now I'm going to pop this in the fridge just for a few minutes so that I can start stacking my cake, but I don't want to put it in there too long that buttercream goes completely solid, as I do still want to be able to push my roses into the side. So I'm going to start stacking my cake, and the first thing I need to do is pop my cake onto my cake board. So for this cake I'm using a 10-inch round baby pink masonite board. Now this is completely completely solid. It measures 5mm in height and has a matte finish. So I'm just going to pop down a small amount of buttercream and just carefully transfer my cake across. I can now stack my 2 cakes. Now I want to make sure that my cake is going to be in the center, so I've just got this really thin cake card, same size as my top tier, and just use my Dresden tool just to lightly mark where my cake is going to sit. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the most important things about stacking a cake is creating the structure inside. Now, I do have a more detailed video where I go into a lot more detail about stacking your cakes, and I will leave a link in the description below to this video. Now, I've got 2 different types of dowels here. These are both the easy dowels. Depending on the size of your cake, these can actually be used on their own, or if it's a really heavy cake, you can pop the circle one inside the square to create more of a solid dowel. So I'm just going to push my first one down, and I'm going to mark the height with an edible pen. And I'm using the Easy Dowel cutter to trim that down. So I'm going to add in 4 dowels, and I'm going to cut them all exactly the same length. I like to think about the structure inside my cake as if we're creating a table. So we've got the top of our table, which is actually underneath our top tier, and these are the legs of our table. If for any reason we cut them at slightly different heights, what you're going to get is a wobbly table. So I always like to make sure all of my dowels are exactly the same height. And this Easy Dowel cutter is just so easy to use. So I'm going to pop all of my dowels back in. I'm then going to pop down some more buttercream, or you can use Ganache or even royal icing. I can then lift that top tier up, and using that guide on the top of my cake, just pop that cake into place. I've now got all of my roses to stick onto my bottom tier. Now to do this, I'm going to use just a little bit of edible glue, or you could use some more buttercream. But I'm going to just add a bit of edible glue onto the back, just to stick it to that buttercream. I'm then going to pick different shades and different sizes as I go and just fill in all the gaps. Now I've added these really pretty roses all around the side of the cake, but you could also add them to cupcakes too. So there we have the finished 2-tier cake. I really hope you've enjoyed this week's video tutorial and will be able to use some of these techniques in your own cake decorating. A massive thank you to the cake decorating company for sponsoring this week's video and for supplying all the tools that we used. Now I will put a link to the cake decorating company in the description below, so you can head over and check out their website, and I'll also list all the tools that I've used throughout today's video. Now if you have enjoyed this week's video, please don't forget to give it a like, and if you're new to the channel and you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So until next time, bye!